Farouk ibn Fuad was born on February 11, 1920, in Cairo. His father, Sultan and later King Fuad I, was the first monarch of modern Egypt following the country's nominal independence from Britain in 1922. Farouk's mother, Queen Nazli Sabri, came from the Egyptian aristocracy and had a richly mixed heritage of Turkish, French, and Circassian roots. Raised in opulence, Farouk was given a royal upbringing shaped by British educational traditions. Even before reaching adulthood, he was already titled Crown Prince. In 1936, upon the death of his father, the 16-year-old Farouk officially took the throne. His coronation took place on July 29, 1937. At that moment, Farouk was one of the most admired leaders in the Arab world, young, charismatic, deeply associated with Islam, and seen as a symbol of a promising new era. The early years of Farouk's reign were filled with optimism. Egyptians placed high hopes in him, believing he would be a reformer. But over time, cracks began to show. The young monarch was indecisive, indulged in personal pleasures, and seemed largely uninterested in the affairs of the state. He threw extravagant parties in Alexandria, collected luxury cars and mistresses, and spent his time sailing across the Mediterranean. Politics? That was far too boring for him. Still, the Egyptian people continued to love him. He was seen as one of them. He ate with his hands, made jokes, played backgammon, and generously handed out alms, always in front of photographers, of course. He had his own kind of charm. The irony is that Farouk truly did want to be a good king. He simply believed that a good king should live a beautiful life. Unfortunately, for Egypt in the 1940s, that wasn't the formula the country needed. There were too many problems, and too little interest in them from the king himself. The political life of the country resembled a badly staged theatrical play. Ministers rotated in and out faster than the women in the king's unofficial harem. Farouk appointed people to key positions not because of competence, but because they knew how to please him in every possible sense. For instance, the Minister of Education was chosen because his greatest talent was folding napkins beautifully on the royal dinner table. Meanwhile, far less amusing things were happening. The British still controlled the Suez Canal and were increasingly resented by Egyptians. The Egyptian army was in a miserable state, both morally and physically. The situation reached a boiling point in 1948 when Egypt entered the First Arab-Israeli War. Everyone expected triumph. Egypt was the largest country in the Arab world. But the reality was harsh. The army was unprepared, poorly equipped, and didn't really understand what it was fighting for or how to fight. As it turned out, some of the country's best weapons had simply been sold. By whom? Allegedly, by the king himself. The profits were safely stored in Swiss bank accounts, right next to his collection of gold watches, and, according to some sources, hundreds of handmade silk underwear. Fashion, it seems, came before morals. After such a national disgrace, even Farouk's former admirers began to turn on him. But instead of learning from the experience, the king placed new orders for a luxury limousine, a fresh wardrobe of shirts, and, naturally, new women. A group called the Free Officers, disgusted by the corruption, poverty, and military humiliation, began preparing a coup. Farouk was warned about it many times, but he was preoccupied with far more pressing matters, like planning a masquerade ball in the style of Napoleon. While the officers were preparing revolution, Farouk was busy expanding his pornographic collection. Yes, that's true. And hosting lavish parties with Italian actresses. His palace in Alexandria, by then, had the security level of a beachside restaurant rather than a royal residence. On the night of July 23, 1952, the military made their move. The coup was successful. Farouk wasn't given a chance to resist. On July 26th, he was forced to sign his abdication, handing the throne to his infant son, Ahmed Fuad II. But within a year, the monarchy was completely abolished. Farouk and his family were permitted to leave the country. He boarded his royal yacht, Al Marusa, and sailed into exile in Italy. When Egypt's new republican government finally took possession of Farouk's palaces, they expected to find thrones, diamond-studded furniture, maybe a gold bust of his grandfather. What they discovered instead left them shocked, even morally disturbed. The largest private pornography collection in the world. Yes, you heard that right. And no, it wasn't a digital archive. This was a meticulously curated analog erotic museum, neatly stored in Farouk's private chambers. There were provocative photos of movie stars, themed playing cards, and all kinds of adult materials. And that wasn't all. Dozens of kilograms of fine jewelry, ultra-rare coin collections, including antiques, about 10,000 silk neckties, over 2,000 silk shirts, 50 gold walking canes inlaid with precious stones. If you imagine exile as a time of boredom, depression, and playing endless chess on a balcony to the sound of sad Italian music, you clearly don't know Farouk. His closest friend in exile turned out to be none other than Charles Lucky Luciano, the exiled American mafia godfather. Farouk once gave Luciano a surprising gift. Not a yacht, not a diamond, but a mistress. And not just any woman, the famous Swedish writer, Birgitta Stenberg. Farouk's second wife, Nariman, couldn't handle this whirlwind of madness. On March 13, 1953, she packed her bags, boarded a plane, and left him for good. Her place was quickly taken by Irma Minutolo, a stunning 18-year-old who had just been crowned Miss Naples 1953. That's when the true Italian farce began. First of all, Irma was a virgin when their relationship started. Secondly, her parents were outraged by the idea of their daughter with that depraved old man. But they changed their minds very quickly after seeing a suitcase full of money. Soon, Farouk moved into a lavish apartment in central Rome, where he fully embraced his new identity as the King of the Night. Casinos, bars, and high-class escorts became his world. He surrounded himself with actresses, models, and socialites, women who, just yesterday, were in a pasta commercial and today were dining on lobster on his couch. Why was it never enough for him? Every megalomaniac has an origin story. Farouk was no exception. It all started with his anatomy. One of the exiled king's close friends, Michael Stern, wrote in his book, The Biography of Farouk, that the royal endowment didn't quite measure up. In fact, it was reportedly childishly underdeveloped. This sparked an epic neurosis in the young Farouk, which he decided to counter by overcompensating. If he couldn't win by nature, he'd overwhelm by volume. More women, more cars, more gold, more food, more ties, more everything. Farouk wanted to be big in every way, literally. He had to prove to himself and to everyone else that he was a giant, even if the only thing truly gigantic about him was his belly. He resembled an ancient king trapped in a comedy film. He loved women, that's a fact. All of them, all at once. He loved them even if they were busy, married, pregnant, or on diplomatic duty. Once, he nearly caused a diplomatic rupture with the United States because he became infatuated with the wife of an American admiral. His one and only requirement? Oriental fullness. For the record, Farouk himself weighed 130 kilograms. In his apartment, officials later found phone numbers for approximately 5,000 women. But every banquet must come to an end. March 18th, 1965, Rome. The restaurant, Ile-de-France. Farouk arrived as usual with company. For dinner, he consumed 7 fried chickens, an entire cake. Yes, the whole thing. 6 eclairs. After finishing the meal, witnesses said the king reached for a glass of water and collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, but never regained consciousness. The official cause of death was a heart attack. The unofficial version? Death by overeating. The completely unofficial one? That it was an assassination carried out by Egyptian intelligence, who had considered him a state traitor since 1952. There was even controversy over where he should be buried. In the end, he was secretly interred in Cairo, far from the royal family's tomb. Only 13 years later, under President Anwar Sadat, Farouk was finally reburied in the royal mausoleum of the Muhammad Ali dynasty in the Al-Rifa'i Mosque, where his father, grandfather, and generations of Egyptian royals are laid to rest. Farouk, the king who collected women, ties, and gold walking sticks, went down in history as a symbol of the collapse of the Eastern monarchy, a figure who was a little ridiculous, deeply extravagant, but in a strange way, tragically human.